saved. All Israel shall be saved. All Israel, hallelujah, shall be saved. All Israel, hallelujah, shall be saved.
Alrighty, we are back at it, my friends. All prophecy fulfilled. Lesson number 18 on the Gentiles, Christianity's best kept secret. Okay, we are going to get into Romans chapter 11. In fact, I'm going to do Romans 11 in 11 minutes. If only I had one more finger, that would have made perfect sense. Romans 11 in 11 minutes. Now, we've been through Romans 9, we've been through Romans 10, and here we are. Now, big picture here. We have been over the promises made to Abraham and his seed, Israel. We have been over time and time again. We've talked about Israel's covenant creation, if you will, at Sinai, their entrance into the promised land, but not before Moses gave them the big setup. He warned them, and he pretty much gave them a 30,000-foot view of their trajectory under law and covenant. They'd be cut off, scattered into the nations. But ultimately, how would this story end? Well, redemption, a gathering through a new covenant in the last days right before their end. And we've seen time and time again, I've talked about the kingdom split. It produced two nations. Eventually there was the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And we've seen how after this split, as predicted, hey, there I go again. Man, this puberty thing is just a killer. Ephraim was let go into the nation. They were joined to idols. They were made not my people. They were considered strangers to God. Think about that. And as Gentile to the law-practicing Jewish covenant community. And finally, we have seen that because of and through all of these things, really, a distinction developed within all Israel. So important. And that distinction was a Jew and Gentile distinction. This was the distinction spoken of by Paul and all the other New Testament writers, really. This was the reconciliation in focus, these two houses. And even though all Israel had been divided, still all Israel, both houses, they were all under the curse of the law. They were all dead in sins against the first covenant. So, Romans 9, we focused in, I like to say we were laser beam focused in on Israel's story. Paul's kinsmen, his countrymen, according to the flesh, the seed of Abraham, to whom belong the covenants, to whom belong the promises in the glory, in all that jazz, right? And then in Romans 10, it went right into Romans 10, and it was focused in on the salvation of Israel. Israel's salvation. That would be the culmination of the story. Salvation to Israel. Salvation from the wrath to come. Salvation from the death and the curse of the law. So, Romans chapter 11. Maybe the clock should start now. Okay. Romans 11 is known for its olive tree analogy. I'm pretty positive that we're probably all familiar with that. Branches being grafted in, some were broken off. And look, I don't mean to sound condescending or arrogant. I really don't. But it's really not that difficult to see who the olive tree is. It's Israel. The olive tree is Israel. And I don't think it's that difficult to see who the branches being grafted in are. Those are the cut off Gentile Israelites that are grafted in through faith. And I really don't think it's that difficult to understand that the ones being cut off here are unbelieving Jews. Those within the covenant community, the cultivated olive tree at that time. See, I think all we have to do, quite frankly, just being honest here, is remember Israel's story. We have to view this through that lens. Remember the developments, under covenant and law that produced the Jew and Gentile distinction. The backstory's about that thick. It's called the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it's about this thin right there. And this ought to be guiding what we're reading right there. So, let me just give you an example here, okay? And again, I've talked about this. I went back, we looked at these passages in Ezekiel, but I was like, okay, what might ring a bell to my faithful audience? Well, how about Ezekiel 37? Let me give you a few little snippets there. Okay, Ezekiel 37, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions, and I will join them with it, with the stick of Judah. And I will make them one stick, and they will be one in my hand. I will take the children from among the nations, or the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and will gather there from every side and bring them into their own land. I will make them, the house of Judah, the house of Israel, one nation. They shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they ever be divided into two kingdoms again. They shall not defile themselves anymore with their idols. We saw that time and time again. Idolatry, idolatry, idolatry. And will cleanse them. We talked about that time and time again with Cornelius, for example. They shall be my people. I will be their God. Sounds like Hosea 1 to me. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. My tabernacle shall be with them. Indeed, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And again, we could, spend a lot of time on that. We can say, okay, well, what portion of that may have applied to a Second Temple period gathering and all that jazz? But I tell you what, these things are coming to fruition in the New Testament with Israel's new covenant gathering. And I believe that Paul is using all these Old Testament references about Israel to demonstrate what is happening to Israel, to all of Israel. So what am I saying? I'm saying like Ezekiel 37, quite frankly, you know what? It's pretty much the same thing as Romans 11. It's just a different metaphor. That's all it is. It's a different metaphor. Same thing. Okay then, so let's just read from Romans 11, 24 through 27. Let's get to the heart of the matter, as Don Henley might tell us. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into the cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who are natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you would be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Okay, verse 24, for if you, who's he speaking to? He's talking to Gentiles here. Go back to verse 13. He's saying, hey, look, you Israelite-gentiles, if you were cut out, which they were, that's the story. You got to remember the story. Who was cut off? Who was cut out of Israel's tree through transgression and idolatry? Well, Ephraim, house of Israel. Anybody else who forsook the covenant and chose idolatry, transgression, and went out into the nations, they were cut off. Speaking of an olive tree, who is metaphorically referenced by the prophets as an olive or a fig branch or a vine or a cultivated vineyard? Well, that was always Israel, okay? Always. They were always the vine. They were always the branch. They were always the vineyard, okay? That blindness in part has happened to Israel. Now, how many references do we have, like to Jesus, for example, in the New Testament, basically lambasting Jewish leaders about their blindness? He ascribes parables to them and in Isaiah's prophecies to them about, seeing but not seeing and hearing and not understanding and all that jazz. Those were ascribed to Jews in his day. The Jews basically were blinded until the fullness of the Gentiles would come in. And we see this blindness of the Jews continue all the way through the New Testament as Gentiles continue to be gathered in. To me, that just makes sense. And then he says, and so. And that really can be translated, and in this way. Well, in what way? Well, in this way, all Israel's going to be saved. Now listen to this, as it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Okay, Paul is citing Isaiah chapter 59 here, which is only and specifically about Israel's sins. About Israel's sins and iniquities that have separated them from Yahweh. They were actually separated from Yahweh because of their transgressions of their covenant. Their covenant brought them into a relationship with God, but transgression of that covenant law separated them from their God. They departed from God, and God wouldn't hear them. This is what Isaiah 59 is about. Why? Well, because they broke the law. They transgressed the covenant. Go back to Isaiah 24, for example. The curse was upon them, and golly gee whiz. Israel's salvation was far from them, said Isaiah. That's verse 11. But someday, the Redeemer, now listen to how Isaiah puts it here. The Redeemer will come to Zion, and those who turn from transgression in Jacob, says the Lord. Now, didn't Deuteronomy chapter 4 say something about Israelites turning to God? If they would turn to God, he would have mercy on them. Yeah, it did. And that was kind of a last days thing. So, and I went over that like a couple lessons ago about Israel turning back to God in the last days. So the Redeemer in Isaiah 59 is specifically redeeming those who transgressed in Jacob. And that's only Israel, folks. It can be none other. Again, this is the whole of Israel's prophecy, to take away Israel's imputed sins, right? To finish the transgression. Daniel chapter 9, okay? This is the redemption. This is the salvation of Romans 9, Romans 10, and here in Romans chapter 11. The citation of Isaiah 59, it really makes no difference or makes no sense otherwise. Okay, but you got to recognize what he's citing and what Isaiah is talking about in that citation. Okay? Look, if you don't see that this is all about Israel's salvation under law and covenant by now, I don't think I can really make it any more clear. I just don't know how to do it. The full number of the Gentiles are simply all the elect Gentile Israelites in the nations. The descendants of Abraham being gathered back to God in the last days. Back because they were a part of a group within all Israel who'd been cut off, separated, alienated, estranged. So, the question is, how can the fullness of the Gentiles result in all Israel being saved? Or, put it in equation form. How can the fullness of the Gentiles equal all Israel saved? How can that be? Well, not by changing the definition of Israel to something spiritual, right? Something other than what it's meant all along. No. The fullness of the Gentiles results in all Israel being saved, or in this way, by understanding the Jew-Gentile distinction within Israel. The fullness of the Gentiles, folks. It resulted in all Israel saved because the Gentiles coming in were Israelites. Bam! There you go. That's how simple it really is. When all the elect of Israel were gathered in from the nations, when all the outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah came into the new covenant via faith, when the gospel mission went out and gathered all of Israel's lost sheep, brought them into the fold. Right? When the fishers of men, when they cast their nets, into all the nations, pulling in, through the Holy Spirit, all the elect, right there. Then, right then and only then, had the full number of all Israelites, really, Jews and Gentiles, entered the kingdom through a new covenant. All Israel saved. Voila. I have no idea if that was under 11 minutes, but I really tried. Okay, I think we've only got a couple more, and we'll see you next round. Thanks for joining me, folks. Adios.
Shall be saved.